Welcome to Cybersecurity Sense, a weekly podcast providing updates and insight into the latest in cybersecurity, brought to you by LBMC Information Security. Now, here's your host.
Hi, I'm Bill Dean with LBMC Information Security. Thank you so much for joining us again, and we hope that you enjoyed this content as much as the previous content. This week, we have another guest on the show. Caryn Wooley has joined us today to discuss the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification, which is getting a lot of popularity, but there's also quite a bit of confusion. So, Caryn, thank you so much for joining. But before we get into the meat of today's topic, I just want to thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us. I know you've done a lot of research and helping us to get to the level to where we can work with our clients with this. So with that, do you care to take a minute or so to maybe just introduce yourself?
Sure thing, Bill. I am a director with our information security group. I've been with our company for 17 years now and have seen us through a lot of different assurance type of work and have been really excited this year to see this new one come about. The breadth of my experience includes starting out with our Sarbanes-Oxley practice back when it was a brand new thing and seeing us through a lot of growth and different assurance models. And now I am in the role of quality assurance, which allows me to get a glimpse into all of the different work that we do throughout our group and make sure that we have good review practices in place and good training practices as well.
Well, and I appreciate that, but I think you're underestimating the value that you've added to our practice in 17 years. So you've been crucial with FISMA and ISO and PCI and so many other things. So thank you so much for helping us lay the groundwork and doing the QA process to get those things up to speed.
Thank you, Bill.
So kind of as an overview, we've heard a lot. I've heard a lot from our clients and prospects about the new Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification, or CMMC. We've heard a lot about it. I think the government started promoting this probably earlier this year. And what was frustrating was our clients were coming to us asking how to do this, but no one really knew how to do it because the model really wasn't set. So kind of explain who this applies to. And if you don't mind me asking, kind of the differences between FISMA and maybe some of the other compliance programs as to who needs to be paying attention to this.
Sure. This came out of a desire of the Department of Defense to protect the nation's security interests. And what they are doing is looking back through their supply chain and saying, where's the risk? What information is out there that could compromise national security? And then they are moving forward with having those companies attain a certification in order to be able to show that they are addressing cybersecurity risks at the level that they should for the type of data that they have on the Department of Defense's behalf. So they have started this new initiative. They created the Cybersecurity Maturity Model and then commissioned a board to create an accreditation board, which is a completely separate body, a nonprofit entity that will oversee this model. And they've been developing that since the beginning of this year. The Department of Defense did publish that at the very beginning of the year, the model. And then once they did, the different parts of the accreditation body board started putting together a plan for how they're going to certify and accredit assessors and train them and an entire ecosystem around that, how they're going to receive the information from the assessors and actually issue that certification. And then they started talking through who were the assessors going to be and how were they going to get them ready to go. And so that's brought us to about where we are today, which is that they started a testing process. And that testing process is they're getting some provisional assessors up and running and trained in the model as it currently stands. And over the next 6 months, they're taking a sample of DoD contracts and actually going through and having these provisional assessors do assessments for those contracts. They are introducing these into the contracts based on renewals or new contracts that they're putting out there. They're not going back and inserting it into existing contracts. So it will eventually apply to anybody that does business or subcontracts to do business with the DoD. But at this point, it's going to take up to 5 years before it rolls out to everybody, just because of the contract renewal cycle. So a lot of chatter out there, a lot of people talking about it, but it's not quite time to start hiring somebody to certify you, mostly because there's nobody out there to certify you yet because they're not ready yet. But it's also because if the Department of Defense isn't contacting you saying this is necessary for your renewal at this time, then it's not your turn yet, but it's definitely time to be thinking about readiness and trying to figure out what levels you need to be at and what controls are in scope for you.
Well, that's great. And that prompts a couple of questions just to kind of set the stage. So when we're talking about the certification and the data that's being handled by the subcontractors, we're not talking about cleared facilities or classified information, correct?
Correct. We are not. We are talking about two types of information. One is federal contract information, which is not public. The federal contracts have to be public, but there's aspects of them that are non-public information that need to be protected. And then there's controlled unclassified information. So this would be things that are not considered secret or top secret or classified or anything like that, but that if threat actors manage to get a lot of different aspects of controlled unclassified information, they would be able to start to put together a really good picture of the Department of Defense's security.
Or actually their supply chain. So supply chain attacks have been popular over the past 7 or 8 years from nation states. So I could definitely see how this would definitely be an interest. So, with most government mandates or suggestions or certifications, however we want to classify this, there's normally going to be some NIST guidelines that are going to be leveraged or referenced. Which NIST guidelines are going to be leveraged for CMMC? And how should companies begin to approach this if they haven't already?
Well, there are a number of sources. The primary source where most of the controls come from is NIST 800-171. And that is what had been previously used to pass down the controls to the various defense contractors. And in addition to that, there are a number of different federal clauses that are required. There's some NIST 853 in there. There's CIS controls. There's FARs and DFARs and all kinds of other things that are referenced and required. And the model actually includes on each control which ones are being referenced so that you can actually walk your way back through it. And then they've added a few additional controls that have been specifically added by the Department of Defense's CMMC group. But overall, NIST 800-171 gets you most of the way there, but there are going to be some nuances.
Well, and thank you for that. And you kind of touched on the classifications of data. How do you distinguish between FCI and CUA classifications? What are those and how are they applicable here?
Well, the FCI, being the federal contract information, is going to be your lowest level of risk for what's out there in the supply chain for the DoD. And that's going to include some things that have the potential to put the security interest at risk. So because it's the lowest level, that's going to be where we start the maturity model. So the maturity model goes from 1 to 5, and the lowest level is considered basic cybersecurity hygiene. So it's going to include things that are very blocking and tackling type of things. It's the things that everybody is most likely already doing and shouldn't need to put anything special in place. They just need to be able to show that they're doing it. Those are going to be things like patching and having a firewall and the basics of what everybody should be doing in this day and age anyway. So that's level 1 and level 2 are going to be your federal contract information. And then when you get to the unclassified information, controlled unclassified information, that's when it starts to really introduce a lot more controls and a lot more rigor and ability to show that you have a defined, repeatable process that is well-defined and quite auditable so that you can qualify for that certification.
Thank you. And while this is somewhat of an unfair question, obviously LBMC Information Security has done so much work in the FISMA space. I've worked with clear contractors a lot, even prior to coming here. This just feels a lot like FISMA. What are the differences between the two?
Well, usually the FISMA process works more internally to the organization. They do hire a company like us on occasion to come in and do their FSMA assessment for them. But that's an internal requirement that they have an independent FSMA assessment. They can do it internally, just like you can choose to do a pen test internally, or you can go out to another organization and hire them to come in and do it. And the different federal agencies will treat that a little bit differently. They will tailor the FSMA controls to work best for them at different security levels and have a kind of a rotating process. They might do 1/3 of the controls each year, or they might have a different way of picking it depending on where the risk lies for that particular agency. And then once they work through that process, then they have the POAM process, which is Plan of Action and Milestones. And that's how they report their results up to the agency that they work with, and then go through and actually follow up on those to make sure that they're clearing them as they should. And sometimes that's the way that they go and request additional funding from the agency, because a particular corrective action might actually be too onerous for them to be able to afford given the current constraints of their contract. So the entire FSMA process is a lot more internal. It's something that they work through with their contact at the agency. This process, the CMMC, is a certification. The companies that you go to get the certification have to be accredited to give it to you. They cannot do it on their own. They have to be accredited by the accreditation board. There's no, okay, I'm a consultant and I can just go do this. No, you have to be accredited. And from that is how that certification comes about, and that the certification body is following all of the rules and regulations set by the accreditation board. And that's how the accreditation board knows that the work that they're doing is up to their requirements. The certification body has to be audited. The certification body has to be certified in CMMC themselves before they can certify anybody else. So there's a lot of rigor placed around who can do this work. Not that the people that are doing FSMA aren't highly professional, qualified individuals. They're just not reporting to an accreditation body when they're doing this work.
That's a very good point, if you don't mind me spending some time here. So, of course, I lead our penetration testing practice. And yes, our companies, our clients could do that themselves, but they rely on us for the expertise. The same thing with FSMA. That's consulting, which is different from, and I'm going to air quote, attestation, meaning you're certifying a company, the same as a PCI ROC or a SOC 2 or HITRUST or ISO. You need to have an accreditation body that's been certified by the government to actually deliver that accreditation. Is that a safe analogy?
It is. The government themselves is not who is doing it. It's a separate nonprofit entity, but that is it. They have been commissioned by the government to do so.
Okay. But there is a certification or there is a governing body that determines whether or not your results are adequate to meet their expectations.
Correct.
Awesome. So that is a really good clarification, especially when it comes against FSMA. And as we discussed, we do a lot of FSMA work, and the people that we work with are awesome, but they're leveraging our expertise to help them. Whereas in this instance, I don't know that a company can do this on their own. Is that a safe statement?
That is. The accreditation body is going to be offering a registered professional status that will be somebody who's basically been trained in the basics of what CMMC is and how to comply with it. And that's where everybody starts. So every individual has to get that designation first after they work through this provisional period. And then after that is when you would take additional classes and exams in order to gain the next levels of certification to be able to do the assessments for a certifying body. So those registered professionals are going to be the ones that are working for a company and helping them, or consulting for a company in order to help them get ready. But those are not going to be the ones that are actually doing the certification activities. The certification activities have to be overseen by somebody who has the next level certification.
And that's a good point, if you don't mind me putting you on the spot. So, we mentioned the individuals that are certified to do the compliance work and to provide the certification. Is it tied to a person, or does the company have to employ the people to do that? Kind of like PCI. I could be a QSA, but if I don't have a sponsoring QSA company, I cannot deliver a ROC. Is that similar?
Yes, that is similar. You can be credentialed to do the certifying work and not work for a specific company and instead work as a contractor, similar to what happens a lot in the ISO world. So you don't have to work for one to have the designation like you do for PCI, but you cannot go out and do it on your own. You have to be part of a company that is accredited.
Similar to having a clearance. You can have a clearance, but if you're not working for a government contractor, that clearance is dormant. It's valuable, but unless the company themselves, are with you, I guess the accrediting body is not the person, it's the company that has the resources on staff to do that.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess, overall, what's the process look like? So I have a lot of prospects that have been asking about this, and I don't even have a good answer. So for those that I'm hoping to send this podcast to, what does it look like? Where does it begin? Where does it end? What are they looking to endure? How would you describe that based on what we know thus far, realizing that not everything's complete yet, everything's still in motion?
Well, the process for those that are going to be selected as part of that first 15 is going to ramp up pretty quickly. That's 15 contracts, so that could be any number of subcontracts. So those will be involved in the provisional assessments, and they're probably going to be hearing from the appropriate parties at the accreditation board or the Department of Defense before too long. For everyone else, you probably have 3 to 6 months to start really figuring all of this out. So the first step is figuring out what data you have so you can have some idea of what level you're at. And then you start going through those controls and seeing where you are. The best place, in my opinion, to start is with a gap assessment. A consulting firm like us can certainly walk you through what the control is, what we would typically see for that type of control in any of the other environments that we've done plenty of these assessments in, and see what might fall out. The assessment procedures themselves are going to start with the 800-171 assessment procedures that are already out there. And as they get through this provisional process, they'll be defining additional assessment procedures or more specific or nuanced assessment procedures to go with their expectations. But that's where any of those could start. So taking a look at where you are, understanding what the gaps are, and working towards remediation, depending on which level you're at. That's where you start. And then once they're through this provisional period, the entity seeking certification will be able to go out and look on the accreditation board's website and see what companies have been accredited to do the work and specifically look for one that fits their needs. And at that point, they'll be able to do like you would for any audit and look for a request for proposal type process and figure out which certifying body is appropriate. The process itself is going to look a lot similar to the FedRAMP process in that a company like ours will come in and take you through a readiness assessment. And the readiness is different from the gap assessment that you might do on a consulting basis in that it is a prescribed procedure that you're going through based on what the accreditation body has laid out. And so you're going to go through and say whether or not some major control categories are where they would be expected to be before proceeding. And it's a kind of a go, no go kind of a call. If everything's looking like it will work out okay when you proceed to the full audit, then that's where you proceed from. If not, then you'll work through those things before proceeding to the next thing. And then once you get to the audit, it's just like any certification or attestation audit. The assessor's going to come in and dig into all those processes and make sure that they're where they're supposed to be for the certification and work through anything that is off. There is definitely a conflict of interest type concern in that your assessor is not going to be able to be your consultant. So that will be a little bit of a tricky situation in that your assessor is going to be able to say this is compliant or non-compliant, but not necessarily say here's what you need to do to fix it. Once you get through that, if you have some things that need to be worked on, then the assessor can give you the option of doing a corrective action as long as it's able to be accomplished within 90 days. That part is probably in flux at the moment, but that's the current thinking. And then you'd be able to submit for certification to the board. the board actually makes that certification decision based on the information that's provided, which is a little bit different from some of the other things that we do. Quite a few of them, we make the decision on what we're going to put in the report, and then we're able to issue the report ourselves. In this instance, we're handing the body of our work over to this other entity, and they make the decision and they issue the certification.
Got it. Well, I do know between our conversations that you've got a couple of blog posts coming out related to this specifically. One of the things that you touched on in one of the drafts that I looked at was kind of the maturity levels that organizations are going to be measured against. Can you maybe give a quick overview on that? Just a little bit of a teaser to where they'll definitely come and read the blog post. But what does that look like? Because it looks a little bit different to me than some of the other attestation models.
Sure. So it's level 1 to 5, and it starts out with having level 1 is basic cyber hygiene, and it is that you're performing what you are supposed to be as far as those basic controls. Not a major control process. You're just going in and able to say, yes, I'm doing these things. Once you get to level 2, that takes you from what they consider basic to intermediate. And it starts to introduce some more organization-wide practices and policies and procedures and activities that support those. And that practices, the controls that are in scope, increase significantly from 17 up to 72.
That is a jump.
Yes. And that's an additional 55 of them. So then level 3 is managed, and it introduces another 58 of those controls. And that's when we get to our 130. That 130 is going to be what's required for anybody that has that controlled unclassified information. And it's a significant body of work. This is considered good cyber hygiene, and is where hopefully most of us want to be anyway. There's nothing in there that's a big surprise. It's just being able to show it, to perform it consistently and show that you're performing it consistently. Once you move beyond level 3, you're going into the really mature organizations as far as security posture goes. Level 4 is reviewed and adds an additional 26 practices or controls, and level 5 is optimized, and that's another 15 practices. So if you make it all the way up to level 5, then you have 171 controls that you are needing to implement and show that you have. The reviewed and optimized, you can think of that in terms of reviewing is making sure that you're doing something to continually make sure that your security posture is staying the same way that it has, that those level 3 controls continue to be implemented. And then level 5, the optimization is not only are you making sure that everything's happening the way it's supposed to, but you're leveraging the ability to continue to improve on those as well.
Well, a couple of things come to mind during the conversation. Again, with a lot of my prospects and our prospects, this has been a buzz since like January of this year, but obviously it's not in place yet. Which organizations should be really looking at this? And when do you think it's going to become an expectation other than a suggestion? Are there any timelines related to that? And how could you categorize the types of companies that should be stopping and saying, yep, we're probably going to have to deal with this pretty soon?
Well, the timeline is anything new that you want to propose on that's coming out of the Department of Defense, and anything that's coming up for renewal. That's going to be individual for each company. And really the timeline is over the next 5 years. So it's going to be a 3-year certification cycle. So every 3 years, you'll have to go through an entire new audit. But the ramp up to it, they're taking a year and change to get through the defining the model and building the assessor ecosystem, go through that provisional beta test. Once they get through all of that is when they'll really start phasing it in and making it a requirement. So it's only a suggestion now in that you have a little bit to think about it before you have to worry about it. But as you move forward, it's a requirement. It's just a matter of when.
You said something key there that I didn't realize. It's only every 3-year attestation. So it's not like an annual, like a PCI, or potentially every other year like some of the others. It's only every 3 years.
Yes, but I would anticipate that it's going to have a surveillance audit every year, similar to what you would do with an ISO certification. The auditor comes out and revisits and audits certain controls, a subset of controls, looks at things that maybe weren't quite where they were supposed to be the last time they were out, that kind of thing, and make sure that you haven't had any major changes.
Got it. Well, it's similar to high trust too, so definitely falls in line with that. But that 3 year is a lot easier than every year,
Yes.
for what it's worth. I mean, this is so much great information. By reading your blog post drafts and then, just through this conversation, I learned a lot more. Actually, if you don't mind, seeing as though you're leading this for us a little bit to help us get ready for this, where are we as LBMC Information Security in this process? And when can we begin actually providing these assessments and certifications for clients that are interested in it?
Well, we are in talks to determine if we are going to be a part of the provisional process or if we are going to wait until after that is concluded to seek our accreditation. But we are able to start providing the consulting and readiness type of work at any time. And we'll probably be looking to build out some remediation type consulting as well. Our LBMC technology affiliate will also be looking at how they're able to help clients with this. So we've got a lot of different pieces and parts that we're bringing together to make sure that we're doing it right and doing the right thing and aren't introducing a conflicts of interest or anything like that. It's a delicate balance in a system like this where there's a lot of moving parts. But we're ready to hit the ground and help now. And then I would say over the next 4 to 6 months, we'll know a whole lot more about where we are in the accreditation cycle and being able to do the certification work ourselves and submit that on the client's behalf.
Well, I'm somewhat competitive, so I'm assuming we'll be on the front end of this as well as any other companies that have been pursuing this as long as we have. So it's not a matter of us getting ready. It's just a matter of the system being ready for us to be able to provide
That's
certification.
That's right. We would be ready to go today if they were ready to take our application. But no, we have a little bit of waiting to do and getting ready ourselves to make sure we've got the entire infrastructure in place to support what our clients are going to need.
Perfect. Well, we went a little bit longer than a normal podcast, but Caryn, thank you so much for your time on CMMC. And again, for what it's worth, everything that you've done to help us build the practices with all the other attestation models that we have. Any parting thoughts before we wrap up? I tried to hit the high parts that I thought about, during the conversation, but you may have some nuggets that you were just kind of holding back.
Well, I just think that this is a really exciting opportunity for people in the security field. Sometimes it seems like we've hit the major milestones in developing security posture, and then we take a look and there's an entire sector that really needs some attention, and we get to be a part of that. It's a new and exciting way to look at security and to help protect the nation's interests at the same time. And I think that that's a great thing to be a part of, and I'm really looking forward to it.
That is awesome wrap up. So thank you so much, Caryn. So for all the listeners, thank you so much for listening and continue to subscribe and download. Tune in next time for our next episode. As always, if you have a particular topic that you'd like to hear about on this podcast, as many have done in the past, please contact me directly at bdean@lbmc.com. To learn more about LBMC Security and the services we provide, please visit lbmcinformationsecurity.com. Have a great week, and we'll talk to you soon. Thank you.